Welcome to Photoactive, a podcast about photography and technology. I'm Kirk McElhearn.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. I'm involved in a number of podcasts, and every once in a while, I have a guest on one podcast whose circle of the Venn diagram overlaps with the Venn diagram of another podcast. Today, I'm happy to welcome S.J. Watson, Steve Watson, who is an author who I interviewed on the Right Now with Scrivener podcast a few months ago. If you don't know Scrivener, it is kind of like Photoshop for creative writing. Like, it has a million features, but it's really great if you're a creative writer. And Steve, when we were talking, he mentioned that he uses photography. He uses his camera, goes out and does street photography as a way of kind of inspiring his writing. So I thought that would be interesting to talk about. So, Steve, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, it's quite nice to not be talking about writing for a change.
Exactly. Sure we'll briefly talk about, we'll talk about the inspiration for writing. First, Steve is the author of Before I Go to Sleep, which has sold 3.5 billion copies in 175 languages, was made into a major motion picture with Nicole Kidman and Colin Firth, and it was his first novel. And as I mentioned in the podcast where we talked about it, it's like being struck by lightning. We won't talk about any more of that. I'll put a link in the show notes to the Scrivener podcast, because it really is a great story how Steve went from an audiologist at the NHS to becoming a storied writer, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when did the photography itch grab you? Was this before you started writing?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I wish I had sold that many copies, because then I might be able to afford the new Leica.
Yes. So another thing is Steve told me he has a Leica Q2. And then I said, oh, he's my man. Totally.
Yeah, I think it's a Q. I've got a Q, actually. It's not even the Q2.
It's not even the Q2.
No, just before Q2 came out, which is a bit stupid of me. But,
okay, you're two generations back. It's still a wonderful camera.
I'm 2 generations. Yeah, it's old. So what was the question?
The question was, when did you get the photography itch?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, even as a sort of, I don't know, early teen, I suppose, I had an SLR, and I was into photography, but I don't think I hadn't. It was quite a long time until before I discovered or realized what sort of area of photography I was most interested in. I used to, because I used to buy amateur photography or whatever that magazine was called, and then I'd want to go out and take beautiful landscapes, but I didn't actually want to have to get up early in the morning to do that. I never
understood.
Yeah, it might sound kind of ridiculous, but I never really kind of made the link between light and photography until quite late. So I sort of got into it at a relatively young age, but I never felt that I'd taken a decent photo. I sort of, I'd kind of done a lot of maybe like with my writing, I'd done sort of lots of reading about, I knew my F numbers, I knew shutter speeds, and I knew the sort of principles and the theory behind photography and depth of field and all that kind of stuff. But it took me a while to find my I was going to say my voice, but the equivalent, I suppose, the equivalent of my voice. That kind of
your style,
my particular, my style, where my particular interests of photography were. So yeah.
Did you start shooting film? I mean, you're younger than me, but did you start shooting film?
Yeah, I mean, we're now talking. Yeah, this would have been the sort of mid to late 80s, I suppose. So yeah,
okay.
Digital was a long way off.
Yeah. Yeah. I started with film too actually in high school in the 70s, but then in the 80s, I had a couple of Olympus cameras. But you see, then in photography, you had this period where digital cameras came out and they were crap. Yes. And so if you wanted to try them, you were getting these 1 megapixel photos, which seemed miraculous because you weren't paying for the film and you weren't processing it. Yeah. But they were crap until, I want to say 10 years ago. Is that fair?
Well, and they were crap and expensive, so an extra bonus.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So when did you switch to digital?
Well, I mean, I had a digital camera in about 2005, but that was my kind of point and shoot, let's go on holiday camera. It wasn't anything I was even attempting to do anything even semi-serious with. And that wasn't bad. It was an Ixus, I think. That seems to ring a bell. But in terms of, I think I got my first digital SLR. Oh gosh, I don't. Probably not long after that, actually. No, actually, probably near 2009, 2010, maybe. Got a Canon EOS something. So that was when I got a digital SLR. So it was a while. But a bit like with my writing, actually, there were some quite long periods, kind of fallow periods, where I didn't really take that many photos. It was, I think, kind of, about towards the end of the sort of 2008, 2009, when I sort of decided I wanted to get back into my photography and went out and got a digital SLR.
So as part of that jump, is that something where you sort of felt like you needed to just take another step, and that's why you got a DSLR and moving up into like a higher, I don't know, quote level, or that just seemed like the natural progression? I want to do some photography, so I guess I need to get a DSLR.
I think it was probably a little bit of both. I think it was definitely I think it was a case of it was a bit like my writing. It was a kind of a hobby I sort of let slide a little bit. And I'd always had it on the back burner, something I wanted to get back into. And in the kind of intervening years, film had kind of was being replaced by digital. And I think there was also a part of me that thought, well, if I go out and buy myself a relatively expensive digital camera, that will inspire me to go out and actually use it.
And did that work?
To an extent. Those things, I don't know about you, but for me, those things never work in quite the same way that I think they're going to. It's like when I went and bought a Peloton, I thought I'd become super fit within 6 months. Of course, now I'm using it to hang my clothes on like everybody else. A bit better it was a bit better with the camera, but I did use it. I did use it. I started to take. I remember I'd forgotten this actually. I sort of set myself a challenge that I would try and take a photo a day. I did a photo a day project. Which I've done since actually, but the thing is, since it's kind of become more of a phone camera sort of project, I do, just for myself really. But yeah, there was a year I think where I annoyingly missed one day. For me, that because I'm sort of slightly obsessive about certain things, that kind of ruined the whole thing for me.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because you were reading these photography magazines, so you were seeing the ads and the reviews of the new cameras, and you got prodded into buying the new camera, the gear acquisition syndrome that we all suffer from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
And so we did an episode recently about how I sold all my Fujifilm gear and my Q2 monochrome, and I've got one camera, one lens. And I think, you were talking about landscape photography and not getting up early. I mean, I'm totally with you there. The idea of a lot of photographers, they see these magazines and they show, here's portraits and here's landscape and here's underwater photographer and here's macro photography. And you're tempted to try and do everything, but you have to get to a point where you realize you can't do everything. You've got to pick something.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit like with my writing. I when I started writing seriously, I wanted to write literary fiction and science fiction and not so much romance, but it was on the list. And I wanted to write crime fiction and thriller fiction, and you can't, well, you can, I suppose, but you can't become proficient. Certainly not good at everything. You have to choose, or I don't even feel like I chose. It kind of almost feels like, in both my decision to write psychological thrillers and my decision to pursue street photography, felt like it was when I hit upon that, this is what I love and this is what I really enjoy, and made the decision to forget about landscape, to forget about formal portraiture at any, and to just pursue the one field, that made a big difference.
I think this is a process we have to go through. That unless you're going to spend your entire life going to the local camera club and trying to do every type of photography, things are going to go through a funnel and get filtered, and you'll find the ones that speak to you, right?
I think so, yeah. And I don't think you. I mean, you can become proficient at obviously lots of different things, but there's the kind of passion that you need if you're really going to get good at. I still, and also basically, I still don't like getting up in the morning to go out and take landscapes. So yeah. I think I mean, a lot of the skill, again, like writing, a lot of the skills are transferable. Obviously, the other week, my parents asked me if I'd go and take some photos of the grandkids. My stepbrother's kids, because it's nice to have nice photos, and I sort of feel like I wouldn't. Say I'm a portrait photographer and start to kind of sell myself on that, but I think they were better than they would have been had I not been into photography and explored other areas. They were
Sure.
they were better than they would have been otherwise. But because obviously a lot of the principles are the same, and a lot of the the ideas about composition and light and all the stuff that we know about. But yeah, it was important to kind of it was when I sort of discovered street photography as my thing. And also for me, it's also, I mean, maybe we'll come on to this, I don't know, but it's also street photography absolutely pushes me outside my comfort zone. Much more than getting up in the morning does, actually. It's much more of a wrench for me, but it's in a healthy way, I think. So yeah.
Well, especially you've got a 28mm lens, so you've got to get relatively close to people. I'm not the kind of person who can go up to someone and say, "Excuse me, can I take your photo?" That would be totally, I would hide under a rock before doing that. But when you have that kind of a wide angle, you still have to be close to people. And you have to make it look like you're not a creep taking photos, right?
Yeah, and I don't really know how to do that. But I mean, I have never been beaten up or attacked or threatened, or even only one time has someone, kind of quite verbally, aggressively reacted to me taking a photo of them. And even then, I think it was because they thought I was videoing them, which I wasn't.
But the thing is, with a real camera, it's different than with a cell phone. If someone's just looking with a cell phone like they're just taking a video because they're on holiday, then no one says anything. But when they see a real camera, that's like big equipment. Like in those movies in the 30s and the 40s, those big press cameras with the big flashes. That's what it looks like to people now.
Yeah, but conversely, I think that kind of works the other way. I think if I wouldn't walk up close to somebody and take a photo with my phone. That feels this is ridiculous and perhaps even counterintuitive, I don't know, but that feels much more invasive to me. And if someone did that with me, if they pointed their camera phone at me and took a picture, I'd probably be quite I don't know, I would be sort of slightly concerned about what they were doing or what they'd seen, or if But weirdly, when you have a camera, because let's face it, not that many people carry cameras around with them anymore.
It's pretty rare.
It's relatively unusual because people do rely on their camera phone. So so I think when you point a camera at somebody, weirdly they imagine, oh, you must be a photographer, and therefore you're not a creep, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think although I rarely do ask people, I usually just, I don't really like, my particular interest is not in kind of even it's not portraiture, even street portraiture. It's more kind of candid shots. So, but when I do ask people if it's okay if I take their photos, it's very unusual that people say no. Especially, some people look a bit strange and they look a bit perplexed, and then I'll just say, well, it's because I really like what you're wearing, or I think you've got a really interesting look, or you've got a great sense of style, or, usually it's, as long as people realize it's not because you think that they look stupid or they look ridiculous or they're doing something weird. People, generally speaking, in my experience, are quite happy to have their photo taken. But of course, then they look at the camera and smile, which is not really what I want.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's interesting that because cell phones are now so prevalent, that having a real camera, having a non-cell phone camera, it kind of legitimizes the fact that, oh, you must be doing something that's more deliberate, and like you are a photographer, therefore you must know what you're doing. It has like that sort of air.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So was there a point, like, can you remember maybe like a day or a specific situation when street photography was the thing?
I don't know if it was I can pinpoint a day, but it was kind of it was a gradual kind of, the plane was lumbering down the runway, and I just realized that these were the shots I was really enjoying in other people, when I was looking at other people. And some of that, I'm just talking about looking at Instagram. They're the people I follow on Instagram, for example, who were doing like really, the candid street photography that I enjoy. And I kind of then started reading a lot about, hints and tips. Because for me, it was a fear thing. It was about walking up to someone and taking their photo, or walking near someone and taking their photo. So I was kind of reading lots of advice about how to counteract that and different things to try, and but it wasn't until my now ex-partner bought me a course it was just a one-day course for my birthday. I met a group of aspiring street photographers in London, and we all went round There were two guys who were tutoring it, and the interesting. I'd done courses before, but the interesting thing about that course, it wasn't so much geared at, this is how you set your camera up. But there was a bit of that. There was a bit of the settings to be able to mean that you can get it in focus. I can't remember the phrase now, but when you the
Hyperfocal distance
kind of. That's the one, yeah. So there's a bit of that, but it was more about, here are some tips and tricks to actually either not be observed as you take photos, or to make people, or to help people to understand that you're not being threatening. I remember they sort of said, right, we'll meet back here in 15 minutes or something, and I want you all to have taken, I don't know, 300 shots in it. I can't remember exactly what the figures were, but it was like, just go out and take a lot of photos. So it was that course which really, I think, pushed me over the mental hurdle, I suppose, really, of just being too scared to go out and do it. In anything other than a very kind of long lens kind of, and that's also, I think, is a little slightly creepier. If you see someone way in the distance with a long lens taking your photo, it feels a bit like, what are you doing?
It looks like a cop on a stakeout, right?
Yeah, exactly. Whereas actually,
Yeah.
if you have a shorter focal length lens and go up to quite close to somebody, it feels weirdly less invasive, perhaps. Anyway, I'm waffling, but essentially, it was that course that kind of pushed me into the next phase of actually not reading about the theory and starting to go out and actually do it.
If I recall correctly, in the other podcast, you told me that sometimes you go out with your camera just to get a break from writing or to get inspiration.
Yeah, well, it was never, and it still isn't actually. It was never a deliberate, I'm going to go out to look for inspiration. It was certainly at the beginning, it was much more sort of, I need a break from sitting at my desk and staring at a computer and working with words, and so I'm going to go out. And at the time I was living in London, I'm going to go out into the streets of London and get the tube to a particular area where I think it might be kind of fertile hunting ground, if you like, and just do a bit of photography just to get myself out of the house and to get myself moving, and but it was very. It wasn't very long until I realized that the two disciplines, or the two creative areas, were kind of feeding each other, in a way that I hadn't expected. I did think it was just going to be not a distraction, but just a hobby, something that wasn't work, that was creative but not work. That was the way I went into it, and still do, actually. That was the way I still do kind of see it. It's a creative outlet for me, but it's not a creative outlet that has become a job that I need to or want to make my living from. But so it was a really great, wonderful surprise when I realized that actually it wasn't just a distraction; it was also helping me.
Have you ever taken a picture of someone and thought, that's my character, or that's my next character?
Not in that kind of way, no. But I think probably when I'm writing, there are certain people I remember. Maybe there were even shots that I never kind of decided were worthy. I mean, I keep them all, but were worthy of kind of, because I'm sure you obviously know, there's a lot of discarded rubbish when you're taking street photographs, and relatively few of them actually work on any kind of level. So there are some when I'm writing, I will sometimes think, I think I'm thinking of this guy or this woman or this, this person. And it's not even necessarily a shot that was particularly successful.
Yeah.
But, or it could even be a tattoo that someone's got. That's just like, okay, it kind of just kind of opens up a thought. I think it just opens up an internal dialogue with myself, or a monologue with myself, I suppose, about, well, who is this person? What is their life like? And that it's more of a kind of habit, I suppose, of being reminding myself to ask questions and make up the answers, which is quite creative.
I would think that as a writer, going out with a camera with the intention of taking photos just turns on your observational radar. And that can be really useful to see things that you wouldn't ordinarily see, which you're then going to put down on paper, whether it's people or places or actions or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's a training. It's a training thing. It's a kind of it develops that, or keeps that muscle kind of healthy. That being out in the world, but actually trying to see it on a maybe on a deeper level, perhaps. I'm always looking for the tiny details that tell the story, I suppose, which is, for me, is true of both writing fiction and also street photography.
Do you find that after doing so, your descriptions as you write are more detailed or maybe more fed from the photography? Or is it all more just sort of a letting your brain be creative in a bunch of different ways and feeding that into what you're working on?
I think it's probably closer to the latter. It doesn't feel that I'm necessarily more descriptive or more. Maybe I find it easier to look for the unusual way of describing something, or the unusual detail that can tell an awful lot more than you might expect. You know, when whether I'm describing a person or a street or a tree. You know, it's the tiniest detail which perhaps, and it helps with that. It's not. It doesn't feel quite so literal. It feels more of it's kind of an absorbing of stuff, which I then kind of, on some level, process, and it comes out sometime later in a way that's not sort of a literal kind of regurgitation, if that makes sense. But
it doesn't have to be conscious. It's just that one part of your brain is doing this visual thing, and the other part is doing the word thing. And I know that they've debunked the whole left brain, right brain idea. But
don't tell me that, because I tell everyone that.
Oh, no, I've read a lot of stuff lately. It's not true. But part of your brain is doing one thing and part is doing another thing. So your brain is processing things differently. On the one hand, it's processing what you see, and on the other hand, it's processing what you imagine to convert it into words.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I think about when you think about it, it's kind of obvious in a way that street photography and writing fiction would kind of feed each other, because, I mean, this is a very simplified way of thinking about it, but with writing, I'm trying to use a story to create images, and with photography, I'm trying to use images to create a story. So it kind of is common sense, in a way, that these two things would, in a kind of virtuous feedback loop, would kind of feed each other. So. Yeah, but I think, like a lot of things, I don't necessarily want to question why too much, because it becomes a kind of conscious thing.
Yeah. Are you a purchaser or collector of photo books?
I wouldn't say I was a collector. I do, and I don't purchase that many anymore. But I do have a few that I like to look at, and just. But the problem the problem is a bit like when I read a great novel. I'm like, oh damn, I thought I was good. I think it's the same if I get.
What I find is if I spend a lot of time looking at the work of a photographer, then the next time I go out, I can see the world the way they do, right? I see what they're capturing, and then my brain is attuned to that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe what I should do is just kind of immerse myself in one. Yeah, choose one photographer and then just immerse myself in their work for a while.
Yeah, there are some particularly good street photographers. While you were talking just before, I looked up, there's a book I want to recommend to you. It's called The Street Philosophy of Gary Winogrand. It's 100 photos by Gary Winogrand with text by Jeff Dyer. And what's fascinating is he's imagining who the characters are. And sometimes you have a character in photo number 12, and then in photo number 45, he said, this is the same character as before, but in a different place. He's making these stories about it. Unfortunately, it's out of print. And this is the problem with photo books. They don't stay in print very often. So you've really got to catch them when they come out.
Well, I mean, I love Dyer's work and I love Winogrand's photography, so that feels like a.
Well, you should look.
How do I not know about this book?
It was published by, I think, the University of Texas Press, so it wasn't well distributed. It looks like 2018. I see a Guardian article mentioning it, which is how I found out about it.
Oh, right.
But that's the kind of book for me that marries the idea of the image and the words.
Yeah,
because as you say, you like Winogrand and Dyer, and I think they're both wonderful, people in their particular crafts. But putting them together, even though it's Winogrand's dead; he's been dead for a while, so there's no agreement on this. In a way, it's like I'm going to mention one of my favorite books of all time, which is Zona by Jeff Dyer. It's a book about Tarkovsky's film Stalker, where he analyzes it. And it's just such a strange book. Like sometimes he's talking about the film, sometimes he's talking about his experience. And you can get that from images. You can extrapolate a lot. And anyway, if you can find a copy of this, a wonderful book, really worth getting.
Yeah, I'll definitely have a look for that. Yeah.
One last thing on the street photography. Do you find yourself using it in a documentary way? Like I know that I need to have a character at this tube stop and they need to go from here to there, and I'm just going to go and shoot so you can describe accurately. They come out of the underground and there's a fountain on the right or something like that. Like, do you use it in that manner I don't know, Google
No,
Street
no,
View.
not at all. No, I have never done that. I mean, I'm more likely if I need that because I would be more likely to go to the tube station with my camera phone,
Mm,
sorry, my phone camera, and and take just shots of there's a fountain there, take a shot of that fountain. But it's a weird thing is it's not really about just that this fountain is physically there. It's kind of trying to get to, well, what is it about that fountain? What is it? Why have I noticed that? You know, what is it? Is it the sound of it? Is it the atmosphere it gives the street? So, so it's more about, I'm much more likely to actually go weirdly to go there with my notebook than I am with my Leica. But it's the two things are much more kind of separate, and the way that they influence each other is much more of a kind of synergistic way, I suppose, than a literal kind of. I need a character who's on top of this hill, so I'll go to this hill and find someone.
Do you ever go out with your camera and your notebook, or are they mutually exclusive?
They're not mutually exclusive in that I almost always have a notebook. Often I'm using the notes app on my phone, but I've always got some way of taking notes with me. But I think it does feel like I've made, and maybe this is one of the reasons why I think it's a healthy thing for me to do. It does feel like I make the decision, for these 3 hours I'm taking photos. I'm not, and maybe that's also one of the reasons I love it is because it is one of the few times I actually more or less switch off the author part of my brain. Because otherwise, I think it is also a Jeff Dyer quote actually about the thing about being a writer is you're always at work and you're always on holiday. And it's kind of true, even my day off and I'm down the pub with my mates or whatever, I'm still like, there's a bit of me thinking, but that plot point I'm about to reach, I wonder if I should, it's always there. Apart from when I'm asleep or taking photos. So.
Well, at a minimum, when you're taking photos, it's still there subconsciously. Like all the writers who've talked about taking walks helps them resolve things. In some ways, you're doing that. You're taking walks, but you're also doing something else at the same time to spur something else in your brain.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there is something about that. There is something about by keeping my brain occupied. So I'm not relaxing, but I'm also not focusing on the problem I've got with my writing work. I'm not consciously trying to figure out this plot point or figure out this problem I've got. But my brain is active. I think, it's true that, I get home, put the camera down, and then it's like, that's when I'm, making a cup of tea or whatever. And that's when it'll pop into my head, the solution that I've been looking for to my writing problem. But I think that's one of the reasons I love photography as well, because partly perhaps because it's not something I make a living from or even aspire to. It's purely creative. It just it's kind of, if I go out for an afternoon and I come back and I've taken no photos I like, or not, or even the ones I thought were good have turned out that they're not, for whatever reason, it doesn't feel like as soul destroying as if I upload, if I look at the writing work I did last week and think, oh God, this is shit. That's kind of like, that can be quite depressing. But photography is a purely positive thing. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's purely me and the camera and the people. It's not, no one, don't have an editor. I don't have a magazine that's needing these shots by Tuesday,
Okay, S.J. Watson, link in the show notes to the Right Now with Scrivener episode where people can find out all about your writing and how you got struck by lightning. Link in the show notes to your website, to your new podcast, which is Let's Get Lit.
Let's Get Lit, yeah.
Link to The Experiment, which is a project that you're working on, creating a zero draft or a first draft and putting it out there in public, warts and all. Yeah. And I'm sure I'll find a few other links before I'm finished. Steve, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been really fun to talk. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, Snapshots. What have you got today?
My Snapshot is a brand new app called Call Sheet. Call Sheet Find, Cast, and Crew. It's by Casey Liss, who's also a podcaster and iOS developer. And let me set the stage. When I am watching TV or movies, I will frequently want to go to IMDb and find out who's that actor or what other movie has this director done, to such an extent that I think the AI stuff in my phone just knows that when I do a search between, say, like 5 and 9 p.m. in the evening, IMDb app comes up straight away. And that's fine, but the IMDb app it's kind of cluttered and there's ads and, Amazon owns it, and therefore they want to push everything. And what Call Sheet is, it has the same types of information without the clutter, and it's fast. It's free with in-app purchases. A yearly subscription is $9, or you can do monthly for $1. But if it's the type of information that you access a lot and you just don't want that friction, it's a really good choice. Kirk, what do you have?
I have a new Michael Kenna, and it's not a book this time.
You have Michael Kenna? Michael Kenna's there with you?
He's in the other room.
Okay.
It's a colotype portfolio containing 7 of Michael Kenna's signature works. A colotype is described as a photomechanical flat printing process used to produce varying tones and shades. The process involves coating a glass plate in a gelatin solution, and over that a light-sensitive dichromate gelatin, which is left to dry at around 50 degrees Celsius. It's a very old process. It was created in 1855. It's not used very often, but there is a company in Japan called Benrido, Benrido, that makes these portfolios of colotype prints of a number of different photographers. They have one with photos by Saul Leiter. They have a lot of Japanese photographers. They have the French photographer Robert Doisneau. They even have some limited edition portfolios. This is relatively affordable. I think I paid £80 for it. Again, it's only 7 photos, but they're about, I'm not going to open the portfolio. They're about 5 inches square, so they're smaller than the print that Michael Kenna makes. But it's the kind of thing where I want to get a couple of frames and frame some of these and put 4 of them on a wall in one place or something like that. They're really nice. These minimalist prints of Michael Kenna's photos of Hokkaido in northern Japan, which he loves so much, where you've got the snow and the trees and the really quiet settings. So it's just called Michael Kenna Hokkaido 2020 Colotype Portfolio. Link in the show notes. I got it from Photo Bookstore in the UK. You could order it from Benrido in Japan. I think these are open editions, so it's likely not going to go out of print the same way a book would. In the sense that a book, you're printing 250 pages, you have to print all the pages, and that's expensive. Whereas here, they're printing 7 prints. Maybe they do 20, and then they do another 20 in 2 or 3 months or whatever they need. So all of the ones that I've seen from them seem to be in print. So
it sounds lovely.
It is. It's quite nice.
All right. Until next time.
Until next time, Jeff. Thanks for listening to Photoactive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/photoactivecast. That's photoactivecast in one word. You can subscribe to Photoactive in your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review in iTunes or in your podcast app.